Hello, everyone. It's Francis Widdowson here. I wanted to do a video to update you on the various things that are happening. And these include dealing with what I call Crybully Kookums. And I should define my terms here and also explain what I mean here, because I get a lot of criticism that I name call, and I'm turning over a new leaf, and I don't want to be name calling anymore. But crybully is not name calling. Crybully is an actual description of what is happening, and the Kookums means grandmother in Cree. And the two Kookums that are crybullies are Geraldine Shingoose, or as she calls herself, Grandma Shingoose, and Vivian Ketchum. And I have been examining the various things that these two crybullies are talking about, and I wanted to just respond to them. This is not, as they call it, stalking. I am just trying to communicate with these two crybullies and trying to encourage them to become adults and to take responsibility for their actions. That's what this is all about. So for people who don't know what a crybully is, it's someone who claims to be a victim when they are actually the one who is attacking people. And then when you try to hold them accountable for what they're doing, they start crying about it and saying, poor me, I'm being attacked, and so on. And Grandma, as she calls herself, Grandma Shingoose, when she was referring to me saying that she was a crybully, she said that it was because she had this video talking about one of her relatives who had died, and she was crying about this, and that's what I'm responding to. And I haven't even seen that video. I don't know what that's about. But I wanted to bring this up because what's happened to Geraldine Shingoose and Vivian Ketchum in the past, and I'm sure that they have dealt with some terrible circumstances. I have no reason not to believe that, especially Vivian Ketchum, who seems to be a particularly morose individual. What I'm talking about is the claim whether the remains of 215 children are buried in the apple orchard at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. That is the claim that I'm interested in, and I believe that it was this claim that really gave added momentum to the accusation that Canada had committed genocide against Aboriginal people. There's other reasons for that, but I think that the claim about genocide began to be taken a lot more seriously after we had this claim made, and it wasn't an invention of the media, something that other people have claimed, that the Kamloops Band was just talking about potential remains, and the media jumped on this. That's not true. So let's be honest here. The Kamloops Band announced that the remains of 215 children have been confirmed. And of course, since there were 215 and it was unlikely that it was individual graves, then people jumped to the conclusion that it was a mass grave. And it's an understandable conclusion that the media jumped to. And then in July 2021, Roseanne Casimir moved a motion in the Assembly of First Nations meeting that a mass grave had been found. And she did this again in September 2021. And the claim in September was particularly egregious because the band had known since July 15th that Sarah Beaulier had stated that no remains have been found and it was targets of interest on the GPR. Now, this has led Michael Melanson, who I was having the street epistemology session, one of the participants at University of Manitoba, to claim that this is evidence for a hoax, because it appears that it was intention to mislead or intention to deceive. Now, Michael moved me onto the neutral mat. I was on the slightly disagree mat, because I think there's this not clear language that's going on, and a lot of misremembering that's happened. And I still don't know exactly what Aboriginal people believe about, or some Aboriginal people think it's a hoax as well. It's not all Aboriginal people, and we should avoid the label of all Aboriginal people. So that's what the claim is about Kamloops, and trying to discuss that, at universities across the country. That's what I'm trying to do, because I think the universities have massively failed with respect to discussing this area, and I want to bring that back. I want to stop the universities from acting like they are advocacy organizations, as we saw from the University of Winnipeg and University of Manitoba. They actually signed a joint statement with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, which Tom Flanagan wrote a piece about, and has been produced, a video has been produced on this. And that is a shocking thing that those two universities did. So universities should not be acting like that. They should be creating forums to discuss these areas and look at the evidence that's available. But because they just have turned over everything to these activists, it's not possible anymore in the universities. And even worse was the actions of Peter J. Miller, who is the president of the University of Winnipeg Faculty Association. And I'm looking into this. I think I'm going to sue them. And that's not because I like the legal process, because I think the legal process is a terrible way to deal with these problems. But often the legal process is the only way that you can get any kind of accountability and get people who have positions of power to get them to write down what their reasons are. And I want the University of Winnipeg Faculty Association, which sent this email to all faculty members saying that I was spreading lies. A residential school denialist was spreading lies on the University of Winnipeg campus. And I want them to specify what lies that I was actually spreading on the University of. And if they cannot pinpoint lies that I was spreading, that's defamation. And as well, there is a little bit of incitement in that email, because they're saying that my view should be combated. And we actually had a bunch of gangsters show up in combat fatigues who were threatening everyone about that. So Peter J. Miller, University of Winnipeg Faculty Association, I'm seriously considering this, because I think, what you did is just completely beyond the pale. And I can't accept that, and no one seems to be taking any responsibility for what happened with respect to that. Anyway, so that's why I'm calling Viv Ketchum and Geraldine Shingu's crybullies, and they need to take responsibility for what they've done, and they're not at all. Part of this is because they're being encouraged by a whole bunch of their allies, what's called allies, who support them and tell them how wonderful they are. And they are not wonderful at all. They really don't have a lot to say, I've noticed. And that's not that, like, if you're an old person, you're a grandmother and so on. I don't expect grandmothers to, by their very nature, have things which are very insightful to say. And that's not to take anything, but we're supposed to be listening to them about the history of the residential schools, and they don't know anything about it. They listen to the storytellers and so on. But as we know from what kinds of false information have come about, we have people like Billy Kookums, who was a residential school survivor, and he was probably, is 50, 55 years old, whatever. He's saying that Queen Elizabeth II abducted 10 children from the Kamloops Indian Residential School in 1964. And the Queen was not in Kamloops in 1964. And even if she were in Kamloops, I think it would be very, very difficult for her to be able to abduct 10 children, because she's being followed around by the press. And who are these children? We have no names of 10 children who suddenly went missing. It's a very implausible kind of scenario. The same goes for the 215 remains that they claim. First of all, it's not 215. People who know what Sarah Bollier talked about in July 15th, 2021, is she downgraded it from 215 to 200 because the archaeology department at Simon Fraser had already excavated a part of that apple orchard and hadn't found any remains. And so she downgraded it from 215 to 200. And that raises the question, if she was wrong, if she got false positives on the 15, why would she not have gotten false positives on the other 200? So the band has received $12.1 million to do the excavations. They are supposed to do that between 2021 to 2023. They haven't done anything there. And they continue. Ted Gottfriedson Jr., who's a major player in the Kamloops band, sat down with Dee Dee DeRose, who's the chancellor of Thompson Rivers University, the head symbolic figure. And the two of them had this discussion about how their children were buried in the apple orchard. And that was in September 2024. So that was 4 months after the band had walked back its remains claim and was talking about anomalies. Now, I find it hard to believe that Ted Gottfriedson would be saying all these things if he didn't believe it, because he knows he's going to get caught if he's lying about it. So I think there's just not a specificity of language about these matters that often occurs. The other thing that's come about, which there's a woman by the name of something Bear Robe, who has been going around, accusing me of lying and doing all sorts of things. I don't know who this person is. She lives in Calgary. And she brought up what she called the 51 children who she claims died at the residential school. This is a bit inaccurate. It's actually 49 children, because they counted two of the children twice. So it's 49 names we have. That's I believe in the TRC's accounting of these things. You can look it up. You can look at all the names. Nina Green and Jacques Rillard did all the research on this and got as many death certificates as they could, which I believe was 35 of the 49. And on those death certificates, they note, many of them note the cemetery in which the child was buried in, and as well where the child died. And often the child died in their home community. So there was an accident that happened, or in hospital because of some disease that the child had. And we're still waiting for 14 of the death certificates, which you can only get if you're a family member. That's why it's the record is not complete. But that matter is a completely different situation than the claim about the remains of children buried in the apple orchard, because the claim about the children buried in the apple orchard is about clandestine burials. And that can only really be suspicious deaths if you have clandestine burials. And I was having a discussion at the University of Winnipeg with an elder. I don't know who this woman was. She had short gray hair. She wasn't being violent or anything. And she actually tried to, help me up when I was sitting on the ground. Of course, I didn't take that offer because I didn't want a whole bunch of the angry bees to come around and start swarming over me again. Anyway, I had a discussion with her, which I'm going to post that footage at some point, where she was saying that the children who died, the 49, would obviously be buried in the apple orchard, because the staff at the school would obviously not spend resources to have a vehicle take the bodies to other cemeteries. They would just step out the door and bury them 10 feet away. And it's like, well, I don't think that's the case. Like these are Catholic priests and so on who are very concerned about burials. And so then I was saying, well, on the death certificates, it says which cemeteries they're buried in. And she said, oh, and who did the death certificates? And I said, well, it was probably the coroner. Oh, well, that's obviously me. So, we're dealing with the whole infrastructure that's now being questioned. But I don't know how far we want to go with this. Like, how does one I guess you could exhume all the remains in the Kamloops Cemetery. There's a cemetery on the Kamloops Reserve, which I believe 4 of the children that are noted in this registry are buried in that cemetery. So, and those are unmarked now, those graves, because the Kamloops Indian Band has not kept up any of the markers, because it's not part of Aboriginal tradition to mark the grave. So I guess you could excavate and exhume all the bodies to see whether the 4 children do DNA analysis. But it seems to me to be somewhat conspiratorial kind of thinking about that, because I don't see why the priests would not want to bury the children in the cemetery. And if it's foul play that we're talking about, then that needs to be substantiated. But we don't have any names. This is the thing. If you're going to accuse people of murder, you need the names of the children who were murdered. You need the names of the perpetrators and the times and the particulars. You need the particulars to be able to make a case. So this is all what I'm trying to talk about here. And because the universities have failed so badly, you're not really able to get into this. And you have people like Sean Carlton and Negon Sinclair who are fanning the flames of the attempts to shut down academics like myself in terms of talking about it. And that's disgraceful, what they're doing. And they should really stop, because they're not acting like academics. They're acting like activists who work for these Aboriginal groups who, either because of their anger towards non-Aboriginal people, which often is justifiably so, or because they're trying to engage in rent seeking, which is diversion of funds, whatever the reason, they want to believe that all these children were murdered at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So one of the things I'm noticing in the comments of various things is we have a huge danger now of having a whole bunch of racist kinds of ideas being more widely accepted in Canadian society. And we want to, I think this is terrible that's happening. I knew it was kind of inevitable, because people are very angry about this and sick and tired of the kinds of things happening that we saw at University of Winnipeg on the 26th. And you see videos now of these arrogant Aboriginal people telling people that this is their land and they have no rights. And this is not helpful at all. And it's not true. Well, maybe with UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, maybe it is. But the whole idea of the treaties is that Aboriginal people got this chunk of land and then they ceded all the other area that was now, it could be public land. So University of Winnipeg is public lands. University of Manitoba, public lands. You, as a member of the public, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, black, white, gay, straight, whatever, you can go to the universities and you can do things there. You don't need to get some permission from some Aboriginal group to be able to do that. Anyway, because of this arrogance of these neo-tribal elites who are just impossible, people are starting to get really racist about this. And we want to avoid that, because we have serious problems that we need to address. And you don't want to revert to a time where people are making arguments that Aboriginal people, because of their race, which is their genetic characteristics, should be given fewer rights than everyone else. Like that kind of idea. Now, I don't really think the problems that we're seeing have anything to do with race. Now, maybe they have something to do with genetics, but that's not really the main issue. The main issue is that you have a culture that is rooted in hunting and gathering or horticulture. And that's not agriculture, field agriculture, which existed in feudalism. It's a precursor to that. And these are, and I'm going to say some politically incorrect things now, pre-civilized, tribal forms of organization based upon kinship, which is your relationships through blood and marriage, as opposed to a geographical area where laws apply to the entire population within that geographical area. And there's a lot of problems with respect to disciplined forms of work habits, which, historically all human beings, and it's just with the lower level of development, you work by the task, not by the clock, and you're not used to highly coordinated forms of labor, which is very alienating, right? To have to go and work on an assembly line for 8 hours. Takes a lot of getting used to. It's not got anything to do with the racial characteristics. It's just you need cultural kinds of forms of development in order to be able to do that. And a number of, and this is not your integrated Aboriginal people who, like Megan Sinclair or Melissa Mabarkey, who all are working and they're totally integrated. They work by the clock just like everyone else. It's the marginalized members of communities. Many of them have fetal alcohol syndrome problems to boot. They live in isolated circumstances, so they haven't developed the kind of forms of organization and disciplines and ways of interacting with other people, which is, if you're a person who is operating within the modern context, you go and meet people who you don't know, and Aboriginal people, non-Aboriginal people, whatever, and you can relate to them. Like you see them as another human being that you're just interacting with as a stranger. You need to make some connections, but once you do that, you're part of the same thing, right? But if you're in an isolated Aboriginal community, that's not how you live your life. Your life is surrounded by people you're closely related to, and that worked very well and fine historically when we're dealing with small scale societies. But in the modern context of trying to deal with millions of people, it's highly dysfunctional, and it's not going to work in the present context, because in order for Aboriginal people to have the hospitals, the schools, the hot and cold running water, all the modern amenities, you need to be able to participate in an advanced society. And Aboriginal culture, the traditional Aboriginal culture, does not have the features that allows people to be able to adopt those characteristics. And we need to understand that. It's been my view. Albert Howard and I have been writing about this for 30 years. And we were able to make those arguments up until about 2020. And then 2020, everything went off the rails. And, now I had someone by the name of Gabrielle Weaselhead at Mount Royal University who decided, since I was criticizing indigenization, that she felt unsafe, and therefore there's a concerted effort to mob me and push me out of Mount Royal. And when I was pushed out, Gabrielle Weaselhead was hired back on staff. So, I don't think it was a coincidence that happened. And so that's a huge problem that happened at Mount Royal, but we're seeing this being repeated across the country. And we saw that at the University of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg, where the idea is that anything an Aboriginal person does or says, it must be submitted to. And this is just nonsense. First of all, most of the things that many Aboriginal people say, especially if they're in the traditional culture, have no value whatsoever. Like I've listened to all Grandma Shingoose's stuff. It's not, what is it? It's like her terrible situation at the residential schools. One would need to look at that historically and examine the documents to see whether, because she could be misremembering about that. But even if she's not, then that's one experience. It's not making any academic arguments about the nature of the residential schools, but you need a much wider view to be able to do that. Vivian Ketchum, she's had a hard life. I realize that. And I know she watches my videos, so I do accept that you've had terrible circumstances that have befallen you, and that many of those circumstances were probably not of your own making. But we all have tragedies that we have to deal with. And that does not give one an excuse to assault people, which is what you and your, your merry band of 6 totalitarians did. And, we have all my evidence, right? We have my mats, 3 of them, which were damaged. I don't mind. This is for me as a badge of honor here. This is shows that they've been through a bit of the wars. Those were damaged by Sky McLean and a woman with 2 buns on the side of her head. We got my whiteboard, which Boogie, a guy by the name of who has a tattoo of nomads tattooed across his face. He broke my my whiteboard, damaged it. We have my sound system, which it's kind of interesting because I today I tried to see whether it's working. Anyway, what hear that?
Bluetooth mode.
It's working. So there's one of the microphones works, and the other one doesn't. So I guess that one got water on it or something. But anyway, I got still one working microphone. So no, let's just say not a lot of harm was done. I can still use all my stuff, and it's kind of got an interesting look to it now. It's been through some kind of battle, and it's like a good conversation piece that I can. But the assault is a much serious thing. And some of my friends have been telling me that it's actually forcible confinement as to what happened when the 7 women linked arms and tried to force me off campus. And the tragic thing now is there was a very nice young man whose name was Jordan, who, when he saw me being surrounded and so on by these women, these crybullies, he tried to help me. So he came in and tried to help me. And as soon as he did, he got attacked by, Vivian Kesham. So she went after him. And then all the gangsters all went and accused poor Jordan of attacking their women. And they all, and I have footage of him running, trying to escape from all these gangsters and everything that were chasing him around. So now Vivian is trying to go after Jordan and claim that he did something to her when we've got lots of footage. So, you cry bullies, you can make a run at that one if you want. But what you need to do is you need to become adults, stop being toddlers, 6 feet toddlers, and admit your mistakes, and we won't hold you against you, and then understand the arguments that I'm trying to make, which is it's got nothing to do with the abuse that people suffered. I totally understand there's a number of people who suffered sexual abuse and physical abuse. I'm talking about whether the remains of 215 children have been buried in the Kamloops Union Residential School, and I think it's highly improbable, the hypothesis. So we need to discuss this in the universities, and University of Manitoba and University of Winnipeg. As I've mentioned, University of Manitoba is in the Hall of Shame, University's Hall of Shame, with 4 other campuses, including Mount Royal University and University of Lethbridge, etc. University of Winnipeg, you're in the elite Hall of Shame. Nothing compares to you. Now, how do you get out of the Hall of Shame? Well, you become an academic institution once more. You capture that. And how can you do that? Well, you invite me back to give these talks. So University of Manitoba, I was invited by a professor to give 2 talks, one on the grave era at Kamloops and the other on indigenization and academic freedom. They wanted to charge me between $2,000 and $5,000. And it's my society for academic freedom and scholarship doesn't we have money that we spend for actual things that are important, and that doesn't fall in that category. So invite me back to give those talks, have some education sessions with your community to explain that you're an academic institution and you protect academic freedom and the open discussion of ideas and the critical examination of claims. And if you did that effectively, instead of doing all this stupid stuff with sacred fires, hearts with, talking about how horrible residential schools were, all this kind of performative nonsense. Instead, talk about the academic side and the importance of pursuing the truth, then your community wouldn't be as hostile as they currently are to this kind of process. University of Winnipeg, you have a harder job because you are such an embarrassment that I just don't know how you can recover from what you've done, especially what the faculty association has done. But that, Rome wasn't built in a day, and let's get going on this. And I can come and do the Spectrum Street epistemology on the 215 claim to counter Peter J. Miller's assertion that residential school denialists are spreading lies. That's not a lie to say that no remains have been confirmed. In fact, it could very well be a lie saying that they have been confirmed. It might not be a lie because it might just be, believing it truly. Remember what George Costanza said. It's not a lie, Jerry, if you believe it. So it's not a lie, Geraldine and Vivian, if you believe it, but it doesn't make it true. And at the universities, which are not treaty lands, they're public lands, we go in and we try to figure out what's true. And all of these cry bullies and all these gangsters are seriously trying to prevent that. And unfortunately, because they have the support of institutions like University of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg, they're being allowed to do this. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And if Vivian and Geraldine are listening, I hope you're doing well, but you need to take responsibility for your actions. Have a great day.